Today we're reading Acts 26, verses 24 to 32. And as he thus spake for himself, Festus said with a loud voice, Paul, thou art beside thyself. Much learning doth make thee mad. But he said, I am not mad, most noble Festus, but speak forth the words of truth and soberness. For the king knoweth of these things, before whom also I speak freely. For I am persuaded that none of these things are hidden from him. For this thing was not done in a corner. King Agrippa, believest thou the prophets? I know that thou believest. Then Agrippa said unto Paul, Almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian. And Paul said, I would to God that not only thou, but also all that hear me this day, were both almost and altogether such as I am, except these bonds. And when he had thus spoken, the king rose up, and the governor and Bernice, and they that sat with them. When they were gone aside, they talked between themselves, saying, This man doeth nothing worthy of death or of bonds. Then said Agrippa unto Festus, This man might have been set at liberty if he had not appealed unto Caesar. So as Paul nears the end of his defense, Festus interrupts to tell him that he sounds crazy. Much learning doth make thee mad. But Paul explains that he's not crazy, but is instead sharing the truth, a very serious truth. Paul must have been able to see Agrippa wrestling with the things he had been saying, because Paul turns Festus' challenge toward King Agrippa. King Agrippa, believest thou the prophets? I know that thou believest. Agrippa would have been raised learning the writings of the prophets. He would have known that a Messiah was promised. And apparently, he was seriously considering what Paul was sharing about Jesus being that promised Messiah. In verse 28, Agrippa answers, Almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian. You see, Agrippa knew enough to know that Jesus fit the description of what had been promised. He wanted to believe. He wanted to have forgiveness of his sins, but he just wouldn't do it. Perhaps he just didn't want to put away his lifestyle. History tells us that he and his family lived a very hedonistic and even scandalous life. Or maybe he just felt like he was beyond forgiveness. Or maybe he worried what the other Roman leaders would think if he converted himself. We don't know for sure. Only that he was so close to finding freedom from his sin, yet he chose not to. And that's what makes his conversation with Festus so ironic. He mentions that Paul had certainly done nothing deserving of death or imprisonment. He even pointed out that had Paul not made an appeal to Caesar, he would need to be freed. Paul's appeal had a bigger plan, one that he knew would let him share the gospel even further throughout the Roman Empire. He already had the freedom he needed, the freedom that comes from Jesus Christ. Do you have that freedom? Have you put off accepting Christ? Today's the day. You don't have to carry around the chains of sin any longer. Cast them off and accept Jesus Christ as your Savior today.